The Apollo Program. U.S. Space Program. The Apollo program was a U.S. space project. In 9 one-week lunar flights, each with a crew of 3 in Apollo spacecraft. It brought a total of 24 people to the Moon, i.e., into orbit, for the first and so far only time, and 12 of them also landed on its surface. The program was operated by the civilian federal agency National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA, between 1961 and 1972, and in July 1969. It fulfilled the goal set by President Kennedy in 1961 of returning a man to the Moon and safely returning him to Earth by the end of the decade. The first successes in spaceflight were achieved by the USSR. The Sputnik shock of 1957 and the flight of Yuri Gagarin in 1961 put the competing rocket forces of the American Armed Forces under pressure. Simple space flights were completed in the Mercury program. In several steps, NASA tested techniques that would be important for a moon landing, such as navigating and docking spacecraft in space or exiting a spacecraft in a spacesuit. Many important tests were carried out in preparation with a 2-man crew in the Gemini program. In December 1968, the large Saturn V rocket was launched with a crew for the first time. This rocket was able to bring well over 100 tons of payload into space, enough fuel to accelerate a fueled 30-ton spacecraft to around 39,000 kilometers per hour, and, after several days, reach the Moon, some 380,000 kilometers away. With Apollo 8. This pioneering feat was achieved straight away. With it, humans left low Earth orbit for the first time and reached lunar orbit 3 days later. In addition, symbolic photos were taken by humans for the first time, the Earth as a whole, blue marble, and an Earthrise over the Moon. The first of 6 manned lunar landings was carried out by Apollo 11 on July 20, 1969. A serious malfunction occurred during Apollo 13. But the crew was able to land safely on Earth after orbiting half the Moon. After the 6th landing in December 1972 with Apollo 17, the lunar landings were discontinued, also, for cost reasons, and the existing rockets were used for Skylab and Apollo-Soyuz. The claim that the moon landing was a fake is based on several points that are currently being discussed in public. Some arguments relate to the missing constellations in the lunar sky, the lack of vibrations in the lunar dust during the lunar missions, and the supposedly false flag movement. However, these arguments are refuted by the scientific community. Main arguments that the moon landing is fake. Missing stars. Critics claim that stars should be visible in the photos of the moon because the moon landing took place during lunar day. However, very long exposure times would be required to capture the stars, which would lead to overexposure of the astronauts and the lunar landscape, as Wikipedia explains. Lack of vibrations in the lunar dust. It is argued that the lunar plume movement is inconsistent with the lack of gravity. The plume would not fly on the moon as it does on Earth. In summary, the claim that the moon landing was fake is based on arguments refuted by the scientific community. The missing stars, the false plume movement, and the lack of vibrations in the lunar dust can be explained and are not evidence of a fake. On May 25, 1961, 1.5 months after Gagarin's flight, U.S. President John F. Kennedy gave his first famous speech to Congress in which he set his nation the task of landing man on the moon, and returning him safely to Earth within the same decade. The following words marked the launch of the Apollo program. I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal, before this decade is out, of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to Earth. No single space project in this period will be more impressive to mankind or more important for the long-range exploration of space. And none will be so difficult or expensive to accomplish. Under the leadership of Wernher von Braun, director of the Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville, Alabama, the Saturn V was built for the manned flight to the Moon. This would be the largest rocket until Starship in 2022. All 13 Saturn V launches were successful, which is quite remarkable given their great power and complexity. In July 2009, the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter transmitted images of the landing sites of Apollo 11, 14, 15, 16, and 17. The successful launch failure of Apollo 13. After 2 successful lunar landings, the excitement of the Apollo program faded. Barely noticed by the public as a routine flight, astronauts Jim Lovell, Jack Swigert, and Fred Hasey launched on Apollo 13 on April 11, 1970.
Das Apollo-Programm. US-amerikanisches Raumflugprogramm. Das Apollo-Programm war ein Raumfahrtprojekt der USA. Es brachte in 9 gut einwöchigen Mondflügen mit je 3-köpfiger Besatzung in Apollo-Raumschiffen zum ersten und bislang einzigen Mal insgesamt 24 Menschen zum Mond, d.h. in Umlaufbahnen. Und 12 davon auch auf dessen Oberfläche. Das Programm wurde von der zivilen Bundesbehörde National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA, zwischen 1961 und 1972 betrieben und erfüllte im Juli 1969 das von Präsident Kennedy 1961 ausgerufene Ziel, bis zum Ende des Jahrzehnts einen Mann zum Mond und sicher zurück zur Erde zu bringen. Die ersten Erfolge in der Weltraumfahrt wurden von der JUTSA erzielt. Der Sputnik-Schock von 1957 sowie der Flug von Juri Gagarin 1961 brachten die untereinander konkurrierenden Raketentruppen der amerikanischen Teilstreitkräfte in Zugzwang. Einfache Weltraumflüge wurden im Mercury-Programm absolviert. In mehreren Schritten erprobte die NASA Techniken, die für eine Mondlandung wichtig sein würden, wie zum Beispiel das Navigieren und Koppeln von Raumschiffen im All oder das Verlassen eines Raumschiffs im Raumanzug. Viele wichtige Tests wurden in der Vorbereitung mit 2-Mann-Besatzung im Gemini-Programm durchgeführt. Im Dezember 1968 wurde die große Saturn-V-Rakete erstmals bemannt gestartet. Damit konnten weit über 100 Tonnen Nutzlast in den Weltraum gebracht werden, genug Treibstoff, um ein betankt 30 Tonnen schweres Raumschiff auf ca. 39.000 Kilometer pro Stunde zu beschleunigen und nach mehreren Tagen den ca. 380.000 Kilometer entfernten Mond zu erreichen. Mit Apollo 8 wurde diese Pioniertat auf Anhieb vollbracht. Damit verließen erstmals Menschen die erdnahen Umlaufbahnen und erreichten 3 Tage später